This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raz Schaefer.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast with Raz Schaefer, your host. Today, I've got Tony McDonald is going to be joining us. He graduated from University of Texas undergrad and law school. Tony's been involved in politics since 2006 through a group called Young Conservatives of Texas. He interned for Empower Texans, a leading fiscal responsibility-oriented group here in Texas. He interned for the Leadership Institute and was actually the first political intern for a little-known candidate named Ted Cruz back in 2009 before I even started working for Ted. That was actually when Ted was first running for Attorney General prior to the Senate seat opening up here in Texas. In 2012, Tony passed the bar and served as Chief of Staff for Representative Jonathan Stickland during the 2013 legislative session. Since then, Tony's been the General Counsel for Empower Texans and built a strong private practice specializing in political work and litigation, including serving as my lawyer here at Frontline Political Strategy and for My Campaign Coach. Tony, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. It's always a lot of fun to do these sort of things.
Well, our goal for this podcast is to introduce our listeners to a host of different backgrounds, folks that work in politics and around campaigns and elections. You have a great amount of experience in this field, and we've known each other for quite a while. Why don't you give a little bit of background and kind of tell folks how you got involved in politics and found what's an obvious passion for this field?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I first got interested in politics when I was in middle school. Had a hippie art teacher, and I disagreed with her frequently. And so as I was weaving things and painting and drawing, I would argue with this woman about stuff, and I always found that kind of fun. And so that was my first simple foray into politics. But whenever I went off to UT, I was already at least a conservative-leaning student. I knew I was going to a very liberal campus. I found politics very interesting. I was very involved with current events and those kind of things whenever I was in high school. And so when I went to UT, I thought, well, I'll get involved with a conservative group. And I had the choice to make between the College Republicans and Young Conservatives of Texas. And fortuitously, I chose YCT. And
Absolutely.
They made me see the light on principle and principle over politics and principle over party and just, rabble rousing generally. Yeah, so
you did a lot.
Been a path from there.
Well, and for those of you that are listening outside of Texas or that may not be familiar with YCT, they are really I've not seen a college conservatives organization nationwide that is more focused on political impact and not just posturing or the personal and the party side of politics. They've been around since the early 80s, right?
Yeah, they're actually, so the closest thing people might be familiar with if they're from out of state is the old Young Americans for Freedom organization that was founded back in the 60s. YCT was actually a spinoff, basically seceded from YAF in 1980. And so we've had a robust state chapter, state organization here, but essentially that was the old Texas state YAF chapter. It's so people are familiar with YAF and the history of YAF. It's a very similar organization in terms of just kind of aggressive activism and, getting results and doing things rather than, showing up and wearing ties and listening to candidates.
Well, and especially being involved in politics day to day, one of my biggest frustrations is when I see these groups of young people that talk a big game about how they want to influence politics and want to be involved and want jobs and want to make an impact, but all they end up doing is holding some signs, getting into VIP events and receptions and not actually doing anything. And YCT really does a great job from researching and endorsing candidates to throwing some phenomenal events. One thing you were involved with that I actually, before we knew each other, that I was a fan was you wrote some pretty incredible press releases leading up to it through some of your endorsements and some fun stuff happening there. Just you guys will have to go back and if you want to do some fun digging, you have to just research some of the YCT press releases from, what would that have been, the 2009 range, Tony?
Yeah, in 2009 to 2011, the one that always stands out to me was we were supporting Jonathan Stickland whenever he was running for state representative. He was running against a longtime incumbent, and the incumbent, Todd Smith, was toying with the idea of running for Senate. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion. Well, maybe he'll drop out of this race and run for Senate.
That's right.
He had said, "Well, you're not going to do it," and we put out this thing. We said, "We're very disappointed that Todd Smith is not running for Senate. We were excited. We wanted him to run for Senate and lose. We wanted him to run and get out of the way because we want this Tickling guy."
It was.
We had a lot of fun with that. Honestly, it was always fun. That was my business associations class in law school became a press release class. So always had fun writing those up.
Well, you did a good job. I may have to pull a couple of those and put them in the show notes for folks to check out because they're quite enjoyable, especially when you're in that political climate at the moment. It got very tense, and especially with the Stickland race. Jonathan is a good friend of mine, and he was running against an entrenched incumbent, and not many folks gave him a chance. And so the press release it came at a very good time. We were having to do a lot of work and needed some break in the tension. So going forward from there, Jonathan actually won that race, and you went on to you took the bar in 2012, and then you went on to serve as his chief of staff during his first legislative session. Now, a couple of things that a lot of folks don't realize, candidates looking into this office to actually winning, sometimes it's kind of like the dog that catches the car. Once you actually win, and Jonathan could have fallen in that trap, but thankfully didn't because he had folks like yourself around him. When candidates are transitioning over to elected office, they got a lot of people around them that all of a sudden want to glom on. They want jobs. They want, special meetings, all this stuff. It's important that they not only know how to actually pick somebody and how to recognize good talent, but how to build a really solid operating relationship with their number one staff, their chief of staff there. Talk as much as you can about how you and Jonathan went through that process and what kind of advice you might have for first-term chiefs of staff and first-term representatives, because it was a first time for both of you guys actually working full-time in the legislature, right?
Yeah, I would work for part of a session in 2009 for Wayne Christian, who's another great conservative rep. Now, of course, going to be, we would assume, win the race this fall and go to the Railroad Commission. But, I had not had sessions upon sessions of experience. The first lesson for staff and for candidates who do win office is that you don't have to go to the pool of existing kind of career staffers at the Capitol. It's a really underwhelming crowd of people that work at the Capitol. There are some great people there. There's some talented people there. But the rank and file, and particularly those rank and file career type staffers who would be available or want to work for a freshman conservative rep, are usually pretty bad. I mean, the reason that they're kind of being made available is because they haven't been promoted within kind of an existing establishment system. And so I really encourage candidates and elected officials, when they do take office, to try and look outside of that pool for good, talented staff. From a staff standpoint, and my advice is, don't think that this is something that you can't do. The job, it requires a lot of work. There is a steep learning curve on the front end, but it's not overwhelming in terms of a challenge. I've found that we have hired people with no experience before they get into offices, and then there's a learning curve, but by the end of the session, they're as experienced as anyone. Plus, we have the ability to hire people who believe in the principles and ideas that the elected official believes in, instead of being some Democrat, that lives in Austin. So that's the route that I encourage people to go with regard to their hiring.
Well, and like you said, this is not something where you have to have a specialized degree in it. In some cases, not even a college degree. You need to be a reasonably educated person, understand how to do research. The most important thing that I've seen observing good and bad staff down there in Austin and D.C. is that you simply need to be teachable and have a strong work ethic. And those are two things which happen to be in very short supply, especially with the millennial generation. But if you happen to be one of those few that has those, the world is your oyster. You're able to go in there and do some incredible work. Because, in Texas, it's 140 days plus potential special sessions, which seem to be getting more popular of late. And you have a lot of work. There's not a whole lot outside hours during the session, but you have the ability during that time to be part of a group of people and hopefully working for a dedicated conservative rep or senator who is literally going to be rewriting the map here in Texas. And we've seen some pretty incredible first-term representatives and senators served by first-term staff that have gone in and done some incredible things that folks didn't think possible, whether it was Stickland or Connie Burton, Matt Krause. We've really seen a lot of that. I'd encourage our listeners that are thinking about the staff side to do that. And for the representatives, don't feel trapped by the system, by the people that are down there. Because on top of what Tony mentioned, in some cases, and this happens, I know, a lot in D.C., is you've got people that they kind of get pushed off on the new reps because you may be a new rep like Jonathan that comes in with all the desire in the world to attack the status quo. But if they can get a few staffers in your office and they're going to help direct you, and that's going to mitigate the opportunity you have to really change things.
Right. Those people that are there, they're taught what's possible and what's not possible, and it's a false concept of what's possible and what's not possible. They want to force a false concept of what's possible and what's not possible. The old thing was, oh, well, I'm a freshman rep. I'm supposed to sit down, shut up, be quiet. I'm lucky if by the end of the first session I learned where the bathrooms are. That's hogwash. You're in office, you're only guaranteed one term. And it's my mantra that you need to use that opportunity to try and change the world for the better. And absolutely, freshman reps can accomplish a lot of things. Obviously, there is a learning curve, and you stay in office over more time, that experience is valuable. But we should never give up on that idea of doing important things, doing things that wouldn't otherwise be done just because somebody is new or fresh.
Well, and as you know, there's a lot of institutional pressure against that, right? But Jonathan, during y'all's term, one of the things you guys did to help push back against that, you might not be able to get a bill to the floor, but you could sure as heck go kill them. And so one of the things that you and Jonathan did a lot of, as I recall, was finding points of order and parliamentary tactics to take these bad bills and say, man, we may not be able to get them to pass one of our good bills, but we can darn sure go and kill some of these bad ones. That was a big effort of y'all's, right?
That's right. And there are other ways. A lot of times those who stand up and fight the power structure in Austin, or if it's Washington, same situation, they're not going to be given opportunities to pass bills with their names on them where, they get to claim all the glory. But you still can pass things other ways. There's amendment processes. There's passing things off to somebody else. And then, of course, the bigger part of it is trying to actually kill bad legislation, or at least hold it up enough that it dies further along in the process. That's an important fight to have. I think that's really more important than just passing some pet project for your own district.
I agree 100%. And Jonathan has really been a champion on that side of killing the bad ones and being okay not getting all the credit for some of these pieces of legislation that maybe were even his ideas. He's done a lot of the passing off stuff and helping people who he knew were more capable of passing it just because of their relationships within the Capitol down there. And so he's served in a number of capacities that have been very effective. So looking forward, since your chief of staff work, after that you went to work for Empower Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, and have served as their general counsel since then, as well as building your private practice. During that time, you've not only served as my general counsel, but you've done a lot of work with litigation and other types of legal practice focused on free speech and the criminalization of political speech here in Texas. Can you kind of give us some background on that and kind of a little bit more about what you've been involved with there?
Sure. I didn't expect to get involved in this work whenever I came over to Empower Texans, but it's been really exciting. I remember before I went to law school, I had a friend ask me, hey, do you want to do constitutional law whenever you graduate? And I said, but that sounds great, but that's not really like a profession, There's
Right.
3 constitutional lawyers, yeah, which is an exaggeration, but it's not a wide. Most lawyers don't get to do these kind of cases, and I've been very fortunate that we've gotten to be involved in some fights centered around the First Amendment, centered around the Fourth Amendment, where we're trying to win victories that go to the benefit of not just 27 million Texans, but 330 million Americans. We've been involved in some fights against the Texas Ethics Commission over attempts by them and certain establishment legislators to try to regulate the political speech of Empower Texans and Empower Texans President Michael Sullivan. And so it's really been a blast to be involved in those fights, the fights that we're winning. We were talking about this before. The advice that I give to candidates that I've learned in this process, and we can talk a little bit more about how to be prepared as a candidate, how to not make mistakes. Those are important. But the biggest piece of advice I give to not just candidates, but also any citizen who gets engaged is when you make a mistake, understand that it's just a mistake or an error. You see cases left and right now. They're from the left, but it's happening frequently now where those in power are going after activists and grassroots conservatives through the criminal justice system or through the administrative process to try and harass them with those processes, and basically saying, look, well, you didn't file the pink form correctly, and so you're a bad guy, or you didn't structure this thing the right way. I mean, my lesson is, look, first of all, don't go do immoral things, right? If you're doing immoral
Good
things,
operating principle.
You're gonna get caught, and it's gonna be a problem. The old thing: don't do things, don't say things that you wouldn't want to read your grandmother to read about on the newspaper. That said, if you didn't do something immoral, if you didn't do something that you knew up front was wrong, then if you get accused of something, you need to fight it to the end of the earth because you didn't do anything wrong. Big mistake I see people make, and it comes out of humility, is that they want to say, well, I'm so sorry that I made this mistake. I didn't file the form on the right day, or I missed the deadline, or made some other kind of typo error or something like that. I'm so sorry that I've made this mistake. I'm just so sorry. And they lead into others picking up on that where they had now conceded that they made a mistake, and then they try and turn it into something criminal. And so my real advice is don't do that. Be defiant and fight these battles. And don't let opponents use all of the little technicality ins and outs of the campaign finance system to try and harm you. It's ridiculous. These laws are so burdensome and complicated that they're impossible to comply with, at least by the way they're interpreted by some of these aggressive regulators. And so it's just setting it up so they can target anyone for having violated the law, just for having gone out and spoken on some issue. So anyway, that's again my advice is, hey, don't do immoral things. Okay, have a clean conscience. Okay, but whenever you do have that clean conscience and you're accused of something, fight it as hard as you can.
Well, and we've seen that from the IRS, their work against Tea Party groups and other conservative organizations on the federal level, all the way to here in Texas with the Texas Ethics Commission and the stuff that they've done against Empower Texans and Michael Sullivan. And that kind of leads us into talking about the candidates a little bit. So as we've been advising candidates and working with candidates and throughout my career, it's especially nerve-wracking for moral people that actually want to do a good job. They're worried because they look at these regulations and even the ethics regulations, right? But we think this is great. Ethics are awesome, and we want to follow ethical rules. And even where on the surface we can look at some of these rules and say, oh, these are great ideas, we obviously know there's loopholes, and there's also ways to fall through the cracks. And you can have the best intentions and even have a pretty darn good lawyer advising you on how to comply with them and still have stuff that slips through the cracks where that isn't done to the satisfaction of those in power. Oftentimes, the way those things are prosecuted and the punishment doled out is a political process in and of itself. So, as you've advised a lot of candidates, how do you advise them to go through that? I mean, getting their own lawyer, getting legal counsel. What's starting from scratch? You got a candidates coming to you asking for advice. How would you help get them on the right path from the beginning?
Well, thinking about the advice that I'd give when we were going to talk today, and my best piece of advice is don't be like Mark Katz. And I'll explain what I mean. So there was a great moment in September of 2009. I looked at the date earlier. Mark Katz was the owner of a deli here in Austin, Katz's Deli. They'll phrase it out. Katz's never closes, right? Well, Mark Katz had his convertible parked out in front of the deli, and he's kind of known for this whole thing. Well, he said he's a very charismatic character. He announced one day suddenly he was going to run as a Democrat for lieutenant governor in Texas. He's going to run in the 2010 election. So he decides he's going to announce this in September of 2009. He calls a press conference to announce his candidacy and schedules it in front of a jewelry store in downtown Austin that no longer existed. He the reporters get there and they hold this impromptu press conference on the sidewalk in front of the jewelry store that is now closed. And he says, all right, we're going to go down and we're going to file for office to run for lieutenant governor. Well, the reporters all knew that the filing period didn't start until December. There they were in September. But nobody told him. They were all in on the joke. He was not. They all piled into the Cadillac, into the convertible, and they all drove down Congress, went down to the Capitol, and started walking through from building to building. And poor Mark Katz didn't know that you had to go to the Democratic Party to file and run as a Democrat. He thought you went to the Secretary of State's office. And so there were these very, very awkward interactions with clerks and people, some bureaucrats at the Secretary of State's office who were extremely confused as to what they were supposed to do when Mark Katz asked them to file to run for office, to run for lieutenant governor. And so my biggest piece of advice is don't be like Mark Katz. Be prepared, research the office, research the rules up front before you make some kind of announcement. A big part of that could be getting a campaign finance attorney, and there are several good ones here in the state. But beyond that, having a political consultant or using a service like My Campaign Coach, where you get trained about how to run for office. You need to do things to prepare yourself to run for office before you make any kind of announcement. There are several different legal steps that need to take place, such as appointing a campaign treasurer. You need to know the process for filing for office. That's different depending on whether the district that you're running in is a statewide or one that stretches over multiple counties, or if it's just all contained in one county, you go to two different places to file. You need to look at when those deadlines are. And so, all of these things are issues that you need to address up front. They're not, really complicated, beyond comprehension things, but it requires some work. And you just don't want to be like Mark Katz and say, all right, I'm announcing today I'm running for office, and then you're in front of the shut down, closed, no longer open jewelry store, and the reporters are in on the joke that you don't know what you're doing. That's just no way to launch a campaign. Obviously, as everyone is aware, Mark Katz is not the lieutenant governor, so that is not a recipe for success.
Well, too many people, they get caught by that bug. They decide to go fire ready aim as far as their campaign structure. That's a lot of why we've started My Campaign Coach, is trying to help candidates prepare better beforehand. And many of these things you've talked about, those are quick Google searches. You're pulling up your state ethics committee or something like that to get a guide, download that. But you need to know when to file. You need to know who you're supposed to file your ethics reports with, the frequency, what you got to track. Because you start taking donations and don't have all your address information and everything taken care of, that's a pain in the butt to go back and try to refill out. So these are relatively simple things, but it takes a little bit of work. Get yourself a political intern, get yourself a brother-in-law or a niece or nephew that's willing to do some research for you. And you can pull a lot of that together pretty quickly, without even needing to hire an election attorney from the beginning. But sometimes it becomes a security blanket issue, depending on how well you're funded or whether you've got an election attorney brother-in-law. Give somebody a call and actually get some advice on it, because you want to make sure that those I's are dotted and T's are crossed when it comes to those things. You don't have to do anything, whether you're apologizing for it or whether you're fighting it. You want to make sure there's as little newsworthy stuff in your ethics filings as possible.
That's right. So
as we're kind of getting towards wrapping up here, why don't we take a second and kind of hear from you as far as some of your favorite failures or success stories. Katz is obviously a failure story. And kind of bring in some other ones, highlighting different lessons you've learned on the campaign trail. These can be stuff you've been involved with or just observed, either one, depending on how embarrassing you want to get.
Yeah, the general, now granted, I think the Mark Katz's launch of his campaign is one of the greatest failures I've ever witnessed. But when I talk about successes that I get excited about are the ones that are somewhat unseen, where I've always been more excited, and I got to be a little vague about it because I can't reveal my hand in things, but there's so many successes that happen because you put in the work and you help put some other people in the right place, and then you kind of let it go. There's nothing more satisfying than whenever your political opponent is offering your amendment to his own bill. He doesn't even know it's your amendment. That's a real success. And that means that you've kind of framed things and arranged things in a way where you didn't have to go and fight something frontally. The biggest failures are when we have failed to engage and failed to fight. I think that the biggest part of success in politics is in defining the conflict. It's in engaging in a conflict over ideas. And when we don't engage, we fail. That's the real failure. Because even whenever we lose a campaign, even whenever some legislative issue doesn't pass that we care about, we've done something to frame the debate going forward when we oppose it, when we fight it. It's only whenever we fail to engage and we just let the other side take the victory without any opposition that's when we really fail. And so it's just those times whenever we don't get motivated and don't get engaged. Those are the big failures.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. I mean, the first one is simply that you have to be ambivalent to who gets the credit. If you truly want to be a statesman and want to work for statesmen, you cannot be so hung up on who gets the credit that you're afraid to move forward if you don't. And that's a very rare quality in today's politics, period. It's the more rare it seems, the further up the food chain and closer to DC that you get. But I feel like I can count a few of our friends on a couple of hands and maybe a toe or two and say those are the kind of people that I look to and like they are okay with getting stuff done even when they don't get the credit. And they are a very small group that I'm very proud of. And a lot of the success stories that we can't necessarily talk about on the podcast are truly those kind, where stuff got snuck through because you were using an indirect approach. And there's times and places for both of those. Jonathan Dicklin, he's known for, in a lot of ways, using a very direct approach. But what people don't see as a result of that is that he's also very good at using the indirect approach. Kind of how vocal and how much of a frontal assault he can lead. It means that when he's trying an indirect approach, nobody even sees it coming because they're so prepared for the frontal assault. And that's simple military strategy pulled over into politics. And on the flip side, daring to win, I know we both get just the hell frustrated out of us when we look at DC and Austin and we see these fights that we have a chance for if we simply take the field and we dare to win and dare to fight. And there's far too few people out there that are willing to go jock up for those kind of battles. And I know part of your goal with what you're doing through Empower Texans and what we're doing here trying to prepare candidates is we need more men and women who are willing to go and actually pitch those battles. Well, Tony, I really appreciate coming on with us today and sharing a little bit of that wisdom. Folks, I'll have his Twitter and information, everything in the show links. Tony, where can folks find you out on the interwebs?
First and foremost, EmpowerTexans.com has my contact information. I have a little more bio information there. You can read about my interest in barbecuing and those kinds of things. So contact there. You can also get me on Twitter as @TweetTonyMac. And I'll just leave it at that. There's a couple avenues to get to me. But if anybody wants to contact me over anything, feel free.
Very good. Well, folks, definitely take advantage of that. Tony is quite the barbecue aficionado and one hell of a mixologist. I know that from personal experience, as well as top-notch attorney. So thank you guys very much for listening. Thank you, Tony, for coming on today, and we'll see you guys next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.